Howdy friends! Exploration has always been at the heart of No Man's Sky. I imagine discovery and adventure are what lure most players to the game. And while I can confidently say that exploration and variety are better now than they've ever been, that doesn't mean they couldn't be better. I'm Kanaju, and these are 10 ways that I would improve planetary exploration. Now, when most people talk about how the game's planets lack variety, they mention planets all sort of feel the same after a while. You visit enough of them and you begin to feel like you've seen them all. And that's a fair criticism. I could agree with that for the most part. However, unlike many others, I don't think just adding in a million new planets or using the superformula as the solution. Well, not the whole solution anyways. So in this video, I would like to talk about 10 ways to improve the planetary exploration experience without adding hundreds of new flora and fauna assets. In fact, I'll go one step further. 10 ways to improve planetary exploration and variety without a universe reset. Same terrain, same biomes. I'm not even going to mention adding planetary dungeons, which they should totally add, by the way. But let's get started. We're beginning with number 10, making settlements into actual points of interest. Wait a second, they're already points of interest, right? Well, sure, but outside of searching for one to take over, you never visit them in regular gameplay. They're difficult to locate, and when you do, there isn't anything to do there. Feels like a waste of the most detailed interiors and most varied architecture in the game. So, I propose we make them destinations. Imagine if each populated system had one primary settlement. Maybe you could call it like a capital, right? Similar to how a space station is a hub in space, this could be a planetary hub, marked when first using your economy scanner in a system. So, no new assets would be needed. This primary settlement would be like a regular settlement except fully constructed, as if a player owned it. However, it wouldn't be ownable like a regular settlement. Instead, its teleporter could be added to your list kind of like a space station. It could even serve a similar role as space stations, with market buildings having vendors, or the cantina could sell food and drink. The cool thing is, this doesn't require any new procedural generation or design on Hello Games' part, but it creates a whole new destination in every system for players to discover. And since settlements are easily the most varied locations in the game, this would greatly increase the number of new sites for players to experience. And hey, if they added some kind of unique gameplay interactions that would make these even more useful, that would be even cooler. But just the idea of highlighting and integrating this underutilized feature into the main exploration loop, that's already a huge improvement. And I speak from experience because my friend and I, we spent hours exploring random settlements after Frontiers released. And every time we landed, we found something new and surprising to entertain us. Just spending time in the lounge of a remote alien settlement was an all-new experience that fundamentally changed the scope of the game for me. So yeah, making settlements into significant points of interest would go a long way. Even more so if Switch players could see them. Number 9, vary weather a little bit more. So hear me out on this. I'm not suggesting we need a complex meteorological simulation or anything, but weather is a fair bit predictable at the moment, and predictability is part of what kills exploration for so many longtime players. So I'm asking, why are all rainstorms hot? On Earth, rain is often cold, and in Atlas Rises, rain used to come in both hot and cold varieties. I also wonder, why couldn't a desert planet have a very, very low chance of showers? Deserts on Earth experience flash flooding due to sudden storms, and desert planets in No Man's Sky often have clouds overhead, so I see no reason why a rainstorm couldn't be like a once-in-a-blue-moon occasion for players to tell stories about. And if tropical planets can have superheated storms that flora and fauna can survive, why not have the occasional wall of fire on a forest planet? Forest fires are essential to the life cycles of certain organisms on Earth. Why couldn't it be possible in the infinite realm of space? Couldn't volcanic planets have rainstorms?
Or acid rainstorms?
Or anomalous planets have dust storms? Of course, I would love new weather patterns and effects, but even just little tweaks to the existing algorithm would create the occasional surprise. Just enough to keep explorers on their toes, unsure of what they'll discover next. Number 8. Gravity. We already have low gravity in the game, so why does it apply exclusively to dead planets? Does it have to do with NPCs, fauna? We have biological horrors and sentinels on low-gravity planets, so we know those aren't the reason. Personally, I would love to land on a moon with low gravity, or a large planet with high gravity. Imagine how different exploration would be in a high-gravity environment. Exploring on foot would be risky, as any fall might kill you and your jetpack would be weaker. Instead, exocraft would then be faster and a safer method of transportation. And we already know how fun low-gravity planets are. So it might be a technical hurdle, admittedly, but I could see different gravity combining with different terrain to create some real emergent gameplay. And again, more variety without resetting the universe. Number 7. Atmospherics. We have fog effects that only apply to boggy planets, but why not add them to some tropical planets? We have dusty atmospherics for some desert planets, but those dust effects could be repurposed on radioactive planets. What about those crazy aurora effects? Imagine finding something like that on a regular planet, every few dozen hours, that is. The idea here is to again take an effect that's assigned to a single biome and repurpose it, sparingly, in order to create some rare new variations. Also, we need heavy fog planets, like super foggy. Now, I realize they'd be hell to land on, but imagine how atmospheric it would be, especially fighting sentinels or running from predators in the fog. You'd probably trip over something, fall down a cliff. I mean, it'd be something else, wouldn't it? But number 6, altitude-based generation. So, okay, with this one, I'm breaking my own rule a little bit, but not by much. So, if Hello Games were to regenerate biomes, I would suggest factoring altitude into the algorithm. So, certain plants and rocks would only exist at certain altitudes. For example, plants that only spawn within a few meters of sea level, or plants that grow on the tops of mountains but not in the valleys, or vice versa. Even with the existing plants and rocks we have, implementing this scheme on some planets, would create more variety within a landscape without needing multiple biomes. The top of a mesa, the open plains, and the bottoms of canyons on a single planet would offer different exploration opportunities instead of the same experience. A mountainous planet might only have forests in the valleys. Floating islands could now have unique ecosystems. You could also have large areas of overlap, creating certain plants which are common everywhere, or creating unique zones where multiple species coexist. Not to mention, this could facilitate the creation of desert oasis planets where palm trees or cacti only grow near the water, but everywhere else is barren and dusty. Considering the water table already separates different biomes on a vertical level, this may actually be possible someday. Suppose we'll see. Number 5. Useless debris. While I always preach that objects and features should have a purpose within a game, when it comes to a game like No Man's Sky, sometimes that purpose is just aesthetics. One of my favorite parts of the old gameplay trailers was that it felt like the landscapes were full of random junk. This planet's covered in flagpoles. This one's covered in giant rings, and there's a random ruin on this one. And here we see a sunken starship. Now, of course, all of these objects are in the game today, through various points of interest. And those points of interest are all interactive. The problem is, they're also predictable. And because of this, they feel like gameplay objects, rather than a part of the landscape. Imagine if you came across a sunken wreck of a starship that you couldn't salvage. It wasn't interactive. It was just rusted, sitting on the bottom of the ocean. Or you came across an ancient pot while digging, or saw a flagpole on a hill. Maybe there's a crashed starship, half buried in the snow. One of those small halves, and it's just empty, turned over on a hillside. Or even imagine if some starship wrecks were actually radioactive, kind of like the pods you find in crashed freighters. I mean, that would be interesting. Crates and ancient bones that are already in the game, they demonstrate the game engine's ability to place items randomly around the world. So why not add more and larger items to that pool? And imagine if certain objects were more plentiful on certain planets too. So one planet might have tons of crashed starships, implying a great battle took place long ago. Or lots of buried pots, bricks, and flagpoles might indicate a long-lost civilization once lived there. This would give planets not just more character, but individual histories as well, The kind that you might not notice when you first land on a planet, but the longer you spend on a planet, you'll be rewarded for spending that time there, because you'll discover more of these small details that are unique to it. Now, of course, there might be a technical limitation, as the game did previously have this feature but doesn't now. Or it could just be an artistic choice on behalf of the devs not to include larger objects in this type of generation. But either way, I would love to see something like this come into the game. Number 4. Caves. Caves are an odd thing in No Man's Sky. Visually, they're quite diverse already. I've explored many caves since the Prisms update regenerated them, and I'm extremely happy with how they look. However, in all those hours of exploring, I really struggled to find anything surprising, truly surprising, outside of small variations in proc gen, and the occasional cave dweller. And this is odd, because caves are one part of the game that we know has its own hooks for procedural generation. There are plants and animals that only spawn in caves, rocks and rare resources that only spawn in caves. So we know that caves can be regenerated with separate parameters and without affecting the rest of the planet. So, how do we make them more engaging to explore? Well, like I said, visually, they've already accomplished that. Caves have a variety of biomes and even microbiomes as you explore, so that's perfect. Resource-wise, caves should have more resources. Both resource deposits and large resource crystals should be more plentiful underground than on the surface. If someone is looking for raw materials, they should be able to find them underground, but right now, with rare exceptions, you mostly can't. Around launch, certain large resource crystals would almost exclusively spawn in caves. And that made sense, right? You didn't have a terrain manipulator back then, so entering a cave could be dangerous, but the plentiful resources made it worth the danger. Today, caves are great for hazard protection, but not terribly useful otherwise. Caves also aren't as dangerous as they used to be. Cave spiders and cave crabs used to be some of the scariest fauna in the game, because they were fast and small, and you couldn't escape with your jetpack. They guarded the extra resources and made hiding from storms more perilous. In other words, caves acted as natural procedural dungeons, offering shelter from storms at the risk of entering some creature's den. It created a lot of really memorable gameplay. But nowadays, the worst parts of caves are those dumb, magically appearing gas plants. Personally, I hate those things. Listen, whispering eggs can be found randomly on some planets, yeah? So what if they could also be found, hear me out, in caves? These monstrosities are known to burrow underground, so what if you could find nests underground? Or what if they could spawn when you collected certain resources? Or what if they brought the mini-fiends from derelict freighters to certain caves? Those enemies are actually specifically designed for use in small, cramped spaces. They can climb on the walls and ceilings, and could take full advantage of a cave environment. I could see their eggs being valuable resources to hunt for in caves. Or, what about the buried treasure from ruins? We have multiple treasure chest models in the game, and multiple loot pools to pull from. And I'm always carrying ancient keys with me, so this would give them some use. So imagine this, you're exploring a cave and you randomly come across a chest, right? Unprompted. And maybe it has a 50% chance of being cursed. Which, if it's cursed, it would spawn a wave of monstrosities or mini-fiends to attack you if you were to loot it. You see, I could talk about caves for hours. They have such vast potential. And I haven't even mentioned the idea of putting other caches or ancient pots or ruins underground, which I've always wanted. Not to mention underwater caves. Unlike caves on the surface, they don't have unique plants or animals that spawn within them, making them kind of pointless to explore other than to satiate pure curiosity. But I imagine the system that spawns things in caves would work underwater, right? So imagine if they were more likely to spawn abyssal horrors or feature unique resources. Oh my gosh, it's too much. I have to move on. Number 3, water types. Now, I talked about this in my last video, but why does every planet with oceans have water oceans? What if a few volcanic planets had oceans of lava? It would be a matter of replacing water shaders with lava shaders and making the water table a solid object that causes damage, rather than a swimmable area. So you might think this creates less gameplay space, but remember, The game is already infinitely big with an infinite amount of water oceans. Having some of them be lava would be awesome. Or imagine if the water table, I'm thinking of this as a sphere, was replaced by solid sand, flat sand on desert planets. It would create vast, empty deserts without needing to regenerate planets. It could be solid ice on some frozen planets, too cold for any plants to grow. The idea with these is to create entire landscapes that are functionally quite simple, but add to the sense of vastness. So we have vast oceans, but no vast deserts or vast ice sheets on frozen worlds. Right now, every inch of walkable planet, above or underground, is covered in rocks, plants, and animals. Repurposing these vast flat areas would essentially create a second biome on these planets and give us more variety than we've ever seen. All without creating new assets, just new shaders and materials for the most part. Now, of course, if they wanted to add things like icebergs, rocks, or other non-interactive things like that to spice these areas up, I'm sure players would love those too. Now, I know when I talk about all this I make it sound super simple, but this would obviously require major work in the back end. Not only to, change their generation on these planets, but to overcome missions that tag these planets as having oceans, not to mention existing player bases which are already built in these oceans. But I've gone too far to give up on this stream now, so just bear with me. Number 2, common resources. So, in a previous video a long time ago, I talked about what I believe is the real reason people complain about planets feeling samey. It's not because they have similar trees or similar grass or similar points of interest. It's because the common resources that are shared between all planets aren't varied enough. Let me explain. Terrain, biomes, clouds, flora, fauna, they're all more varied now than they've ever been. Period. Full stop. So why do worlds feel so predictable? Well, it's because the objects that we interact with the most, the objects with bright glowing colors that draw our focus away from all the pretty variety, those are all the same. The same carnivorous plants on every planet, the same sodium flowers, dihydrogen crystals, the same red and blue glowing flowers. Those objects which ping our scans and which trigger prompts and damage us, those are the same on every planet. So no matter how much variation you add, every planet feels the same. So, I propose we vary it a little more. Does sodium need to be a flower on every planet? What if it was a blob of ooze on some planets, right? They already have blob models. Or a yellow mushroom on some planets. What if it was found as a mineral, right, in the form of a crystal on a planet where a flower might be unlikely to survive? You can keep the same glowing colors so that players know where to look, but at this point, with all the difficulty settings, these generic and ubiquitous resources aren't necessary. So hide them a little bit, I say. Vary them a little bit. And again, this could be done in different ways, right? Maybe one planet, all the usual resources are carnivorous plants, so they're not friendly like you would expect. Or maybe they're in glowing creatures, creating a moral dilemma if you want to collect all those resources. Maybe they're only found in caves on one planet or underwater. Now, I understand the game balance would be affected, but once someone gets through the first few hours, I think these ubiquitous resources end up hurting the exploration experience more than helping. We have scanners, we have analysis visors, we have shops and refiners. We don't need these bright, glowing resources taking us out of the landscape every 15 feet or so on every planet. Another solution to this might be reducing them in red, green, and blue systems, since there's no need to keep them so prevalent if only experienced players with some time in the game can reach these destinations, for the most part. But, that's my opinion anyways. I'm sure Hello Games have tested this before, but I do believe varying those resources, even just the models, would go a long way to making planets feel more unique. But speaking of which, we've made it to number 1. My most impactful idea that also breaks my own rules and requires new assets to be created. But hear me out though. Number 1, natural points of interest. So, we have plenty of constructed points of interest on planets, right? We have buildings and ruins and all that stuff. But we have 0 natural points of interest, if you can believe it. In space, you might encounter pirates or freighters, but you might also encounter giant crystals or a huge skull. These are natural points of interest. Planets in uncharted systems, they don't have any points of interest at the moment, which is kind of silly if you think about it. So let me give you some examples of objects that could be repurposed, and then I'll share a few new ideas. So, we have ancient bones and graves of the ocean kings. Why not use those giant bones as Titan worm bones, right, that you could discover on a planet? Or giant crystal deposits, right? Or the volcano. Yeah, I'm being serious. Take the volcano model from volcanic planets, downsize it a little bit, and then spawn them very rarely on regular planets. After all, volcanoes are just evidence of geological activity. They could occur in any biome. Imagine you're hiking on a jungle planet, and as you overcome a mountain, you see a volcano on the other side. The only volcano you've ever seen on the planet. It would become a story to tell, right? A rare occurrence. A point of interest. What about a hot spring? Like those pools you see in caves. Or a geyser. The idea is to add these natural items that humans might build a state park around on Earth. You know, the kinds of noteworthy natural formations that could be found in any biome, yet are rare enough to capture your attention when discovered. If you want to go further, we could have radioactive vents like the ones already on radioactive planets, but, bigger. We could have animal dens, where clearing out the predators, or feeding them, could grant access to the loot they protect. We could have giant nests of eggs, or a biological infestation like those found near abandoned buildings, but just out in the wild. Maybe it's a rare tree, taller than the rest. Heck, if this is how they want to add waterfalls to the game as standalone grottos, I'd be over the moon. The idea is, you create these natural wonders that blend into the biome they're in order to create something the player's never seen before. A natural spring on a desert planet could spawn plants, or it could be a boiling hot spring on another planet. It could even be repurposed as a pool of lava on a volcanic planet. Animal dens would be based on local fauna and resources, so if it's in a populated system, dens might have loot stolen from unfortunate explorers, or just berries if it's an herbivore den. I could go on, but I think you get the picture. Natural points of interest would give us something to explore that might not show up on scanners, right? That's kind of the key. These are things you find visually. You can't just ping them, you can't just, find them on a map. They're things you go out and you discover for yourself. And while one player might not be able to discover all of them, most of us don't live in a vacuum, right? We're going to share them with our friends, we're going to see them in videos, on Twitter, on Reddit, and it creates this idea that there's more to see out there than you've seen yourself. And not only does that give you something to strive for, but it also makes you wonder what hasn't been seen, what you and all these people haven't seen yet. It gets the gears going, right? But those are my 10 ways that I would personally improve exploration if I had a hand in development. Yes, they would be difficult to implement, I'm not kidding myself or anyone, but for the most part they do recycle existing assets and systems and layer seamlessly on top of the universe we already have. In other words, they don't enhance exploration by giving us millions of new plants and animals, but by varying the circumstances in which we encounter those things. So, I hope you enjoyed my fantasies, and if you did, please consider leaving a like as these videos take considerable effort to make. And let me know in the comments below how you would improve planetary exploration. I almost made this video covering all exploration, but it was ballooning in scope, so let's keep the discussion to planets for now. And let me know if you'd be interested in more videos like this in the future. Not quite speculation and not quite a wish list, just sharing ideas while trying not to sound too entitled. Whatever the next update is, I'll be here for it. Subscribe if you'd like to be here too. Until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!